So let's sit together for a few minutes. We've got about 15 people in the room here with us, actual Homo sapien in the flesh. And we've got, according to this, it says 56 participants, give or take a few repeats or deletions and so forth. And so let's see if we can, for a moment, sit together and realize that we're all sitting on planet Earth. That we're not actually in completely separate spaces. That we're sharing when we take a breath, and I think you'll take a breath or two before the end of this session. We're actually breathing out of the same pool, right? We're sharing breaths. We're sharing all kinds of things, and there's this kind of temporary, transient overlay illusion of separateness that befuddles us and causes so much difficulty. So let's see if we can just sit for a moment, right? Just resting with the breathing, sitting into the fullness of living that you are. And see if you can just let go of any idea that you came to hear a class. You're simply here. Then I might walk out. Or the internet may go down. Or there's all kinds of things that may happen. We're just here. This is, by the way, this is the end all and be all of anything that can be said about the challenges and the opportunities of aging and approaching death. Right? The fact is that we're just here and we rarely recognize it. Just relaxing into your body, into this kind of convention that we call your body. Feeling the tides of breathing as they ripple through this physiology of being. And allow your eyes to be open and experience the reverberations of light rippling in and through your being. And becoming a great ear and reverberating with the sound within and the sound without. Appreciate the smells that are in your flow of experience right now.
You're going to hear it now.
Why did you say that?
That was the one I pressed.
To get it on? The speaker? Put it right back on again.
And right now Stephen is diving on the reefs of Fiji. And we are diving deeply into our living experience. And he can feel the water all surrounding his body, and we can feel the air and the atmosphere in the room and the presence of others surrounding us. We're floating in this. And allowing these words of aspiration to reverberate ever more deeply into your being. We take refuge in love and clear seeing. We live courageously in this world of birthing, dying. Our hearts embrace all companions on this path of lucidity and freedom. However innumerable beings are, I vow to meet them with kindness and interest. However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to touch them with patience and love. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them deeply and thoroughly. However incomparable the mystery of interbeing, I vow to surrender to it freely. From this day forth, with wisdom and compassion as my lamp and staff, I dedicate all my life energies to the welfare of all beings. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. This cluster of 3 gatherings that we'll have has really arisen primarily initiated by Anne Van Leeuwen asking a question or suggesting a topic months ago. Of course, I could put you on the spot, Anne, and say, what was that question? But it might have gone, although it's probably not completely gone. Right? And we discussed, we just sort of posed the idea. I think it was the last class we had here, the last gathering we had, which was way back in February before we went to Wangapeka. And quite a few people expressed great enthusiasm for the topic. They wanted to go because we were going to somehow, it was about aging and approaching death and these big questions which, considering the amount of wrinkles and grey hair and so forth, right, that's visible on a large number of beings, seems to be in people's presence, right? It's very real. And I think for some people, the question, this is huge, because in a certain sense, right, to talk about the opportunities and the challenges of aging and approaching death is a little bit odd, because we've been doing this since the beginning, whatever beginning we want. We were once a fetus, long dead. Right? Like we're sort of growing, we're aging. Did you just start aging? Are we talking about something that happens after a chronological age? After 65, this class is for you. I thought, well, nobody's going to want to come to this class who's younger than 65. That's how it doesn't count. It doesn't mean anything. But, in a sense, like the conundrums, the opportunities and the challenges of living are surely continuously growing into something we haven't yet met and letting go of old patterns that we had become familiar with. Right? I mean, you're the same person that you were when you were 4 years old, aren't you? Or you're the same person who was, 18 years old at parties. Has anything changed? Or is it you had to kind of let go of that, right? And I was thinking, like, in the beginning, there was just an ocean of interbeing, interknowing. Right? I mean, it's quite common, right, for two members of the Homo sapiens species to get together. It's called having sex, right? And what they were really doing was just enjoying themselves and having great pleasure or what have you, right? And unbeknownst to them, a sperm was entering an egg and a conception took place, and they just thought that was great. But they didn't even realize that at that moment there was conception, right? And yet there was this huge kind of corporeal knowing, this kind of cellular knowing that was taking place, this interbeingness of factors, and the social factors that brought our parents together. I mean, just think, some of you are in relationships with others now, and could you consider exactly, how is it that you first got together? Tell me the circumstances under which you first came together. And and they go, well, was it purely economic? No, purely economic. Love. Right? Was it purely emotional? No. Was it a fluke? Was it that you missed the bus and got on the next bus? And there he was. Right? Or a plane got cancelled, or a course was offered, or I'm just pointing out there's a huge amount of not knowing, and yet at the same time there was a huge amount of knowing. Right? Not your ego knowing, right? But almost like a kind of interbeing, interengagement of social factors, of biological factors, of ecological factors, of biospheric factors, of, we could go on and include everything. Right? This ocean, in the beginning, was an ocean of interbeing and interknowing. Okay? There's a verse which I'll read now, and I've read it many times in many classes, so it's all boring. Okay? And I will refer to it again because it's really central. Maybe glasses would help. Are the glasses part of me? Are they part of my eyes? Okay. Life is a boundless matrix of dynamic relating. Consider this. This is really worth considering. Life is a dynamic, a boundless matrix. Right? We just call it boundless because we're being humble, not because we're making a pompous statement of fact. I mean, nobody knows if it's boundless. The only thing is our experience is that when we get to the boundary, there's always just the other side of the boundary. Right? Our experience doesn't find a finite boundary. I mean, what's the whole of your life when you're 5 years old? How big is the world when you're 5 years old? When you're 1 year old? When you're 50 years old? Okay? Ultimately, every action reverberates throughout the universe. Right? This moment is connected to that moment. It's the profound dharma in the universe. The hip bone's connected to the thigh bone, and the thigh bone's connected to the, right? And we play this. It's supposed to be a children's song. And yet, we kind of live in a disconnect of this. Okay? Ultimately, every action, a thought action, a muscular action, a sensory action. Yeah, action just change, shifting, right? Reverberates throughout the whole universe. I responding to you, you responding to me, this responding to that, that responding to this. Okay? In the beginning, this is what we were. Responsiveness is the living heart of being and becoming. Responsiveness is the living heart of being and becoming. I wonder in a way if what we call approaching death is the symptoms of it, not as a philosophical fact that we're all approaching death, but as an experiential. When we say, oh, I feel like I'm approaching death, right? It's actually a diminishing of our capacity for responsiveness. This responsiveness is really central. Right? It's not optional. When you become completely and utterly non-responsive, I guess that's called dead. And we use it. I feel dead. It's like, we're not claiming to be a corpse, and we're sort of talking across the boundary of life and death and saying, I feel dead. It's a phrase we use all the time, or we can use quite commonly in our daily life, right? To be deadened, right? To be unresponsive. Right? What's the kind of responsiveness is? Right? Responsiveness is the living heart of being and becoming. All domains, atoms, molecules, organs, organisms, families and societies, entire ecosystems, biospheres, planets and galaxies, all shifting, responding, constantly changing. In the beginning was this. Responsive change is the very nature and fabric of what is. Permanence is a mental abstraction, a conceptual abstraction. Oh, I seem to be losing my ability to do this, and I seem to be having a greater ability to just sit and do nothing. Stare into space and be vacant because my mind feels like mush. Right? Oh, you're still alive. Change, responsive change is happening. Wonderful. Right? But this is not a glib solution to the question that was raised ages ago. This is just the beginning of our exploring. Suffering arises from trying to fix or make permanent, to fixate on, right? Or to make permanent that which is essentially a seamless, fluid process. Okay? May we cease grasping at permanence, and with heartful confidence, love, enthusiasm, and wide-awake sensitivity, enter fully the great birthing, dying matrix of responsive relating. This ineffable, unpindownable, present suchness of now. In the beginning was this. Okay? In the middle, right, we had a period of kind of increasing overlays of belief in kind of separate individualness. Okay? With different characteristics, that make up an individual and so on. And we worked on this, right? I don't think you were much of an individual in the womb. You were, emergent corporeal relating, intercorporeal relating, cells relating to cells, organs beginning to relate to organs, and then finally, whole organism, still in the womb, beginning to kind of move as an integrated whole in response to movements of mother, right? Shifts and changes in the environmental chemistry. So you're beginning to, but there's still not a sense of, I don't think you're convinced that you're an individual, you're me. Make a change in mother, and that is a change in unborn child. Make a change in unborn child, that is a change in yet to be mother. Because we usually refer to mothers after the birth. Like pre-birth, you're not really a mother, right? Unless you can claim it for other children. But after birth, then you're a mother. Okay? And so the mother is being shaped by this experience, is growing into being through this experience. Maybe the fetus grows the mother. Weird idea. That kind of fitting in with this, right? And then gradually, right, we begin to enter into intersubjective relating, right? Begins to, this, I think there's signs of this happening before we're born, but that's just my kind of way of envisioning the world. Definitely, for sure, shortly after we're born, we can see this coming into being, because the child begins to recognize mother, right? And it's kind of like, with expectation. There's a difference between a table leg and mother, There's a kind of a recognition of subject, some kind of subject. And then we start to, in a sense, develop verbal relating. And we're putting words on our experience and so on, and now, and then And then kind of story relating, you know, the story of the family that you're born into. They've already got a story going before you even started. You just find yourself in this. And these stories of our life, like, don't think of these as, I could have said illusions of separateness. I'm not sure that this is so helpful to talk about the illusory nature of separateness, as if somehow this kind of inseparable oneness is the truth, and the experience of individual creatureliness is a kind of just an illusion, because we don't act like it's just an illusion. And so for me, I find it slightly more useful to think of these as kind of overlays of experience of separateness, which we've kind of built out of this relating. I mean, to go into this in detail would take quite a long time, and we can't do this in the context of this class. I've been talking about these kinds of things on and off for ages. Right? But you can get a kind of a feeling for this. There's kind of overlays of individualness, and the kind of, and not only that, but individual responsibility. You know, as soon as we got an individual, we got a sense of, good and bad, and doing it well and not doing it well enough. Right? And we start to identify, if you like, with the kind of overlay, and gradually kind of lose appreciative contact with the underlay. Right? This kind of relating that's going on that underpins and gives rise to this differentiation. Okay. Interestingly enough, when we get to at the end, right, as we come back to the end, we find, in a sense, our capacities for individualing start to kind of get challenged. We're not the individual we thought we were. We've got problems with change, of like, I got used to. I feel shame that I've got an illness. Or I feel dismayed that I have an illness. All kinds of problems coming up. Right? I feel that I identify with being someone who spends their life helping people. Right? And now I find that kind of all the younger generation aren't interested in me giving them help. I know I could make a fancier website. I got to upgrade the website. Green Dharma Treasury is too kind of flat, and there's not enough action in it. It doesn't really attract the young people and so on. So, you know, we have this feeling of going into death as if somehow we're losing something. The problems of, right? You're losing your, we can joke about it, you're losing your memory. Right? We were, years ago, I was able to participate in a conference of social workers in Nelson. And at the beginning of the 4-day conference began on a marae, and we were welcomed onto the local marae. And there was an older woman who was involved with making all the what they call tuku panels, the weavings that go on the side and have the stories of the genealogies of all the members of the iwi, right? And she was going down, she was saying, oh, this is this and this is that, and she was, full of knowledge, and she came, and this one, oh, Alzheimer moment. Moved on to the next one. Everybody laughed, and so, sometimes we can, I thought that was a great way of handling it, she just, whereas other people are terribly embarrassed, or we try and fake it that we're losing our memory, and we're losing, not quite so interested in things I used to be interested in. I don't have the energy. I start having pain. I start having, I become incontinent. I mean, in a sense, one of the words that in the old schools of Buddhism, they used to describe a liberated being was Arahat. And Arahat has many different meanings, and one of them is no secrets, and it means the inner and the outer are in accord. It's not just I don't have secrets from you, but I don't have secrets from me. Right? And in this kind of middle ground of our life, we start to kind of build up a tremendous strength of capacity to be a such and such, to do such and such, to thrive in this way. And then all of a sudden, somehow the interknowing vastness starts to kind of impede on or impinge, if you like, on your experience. And you get diagnosed with an illness or something. And we're so, in our culture, it's almost like many people find they don't want to talk about, they don't know how to kind of address this. We just feel that, your life's kind of over now. And then you come to aging, which is basically investing in a really fancy retirement village that I saw on the television. It said that you're not actually required to play bowls. You can do anything you like, right? So this is the plus to join this. And so you can sit there and you can just watch TV all day, or you can bowling, or if you really got it together and you're kind of still able to have a body that can move, you can have this massive bucket list, and you go, I always wanted to go scuba diving in Fiji and I never had a chance. So off you go at the age of 85, do your bucket list, and you're ticking off your things and so on. And it's almost like we're somehow, unless we keep on living in that kind of passion for unfolding the possibilities of this distinction making and individual separation stuff, which is fascinating and challenging and wonderful, right? We're learning all kinds of power and strength in this, and then gradually we've hit a phase where things start to kind of fall down. I mean, I can just I can make a list of different things, that are challenging us here. People, what's really bothering them, as I said before, is there's things which are okay to be public, and there's things that aren't okay to be public. There's nothing like having an operation that involves catheters and problems with your bowel and everything, to kind of really clean out a lot of fussing about private parts and sort of, it's just pee, and you go, it's great. You go for radiation therapy and you're part of the bladder team, right? How's your bladder this morning? Because people are getting the radiation in the lower abdomen in order to be able to position it on the screen and everything and direct the rays and so forth. It has to be, you need to have a full bladder, because it's the only way, because otherwise the shape of the organs inside are different. So you're drinking these gallons of liters of water before you go, and you're just bursting. This is actually the most important topic in your consciousness, right? How's your bowel, right? I got these fantastic underwear I got from Australia. They've got tremendous absorbent qualities. They've just been great. We don't talk about these things. They're secrets, right? If we talk about them, they're just nothing. But when they're secrets, they're a problem. And I think a big problem with aging is that we put it in a cupboard and try and make it a secret. We have to kind of pull it out and realize that, like, being a fetus, it's not really very consequential. You don't pay taxes. You don't contribute to KiwiSaver, right? You're not kind of fussed about paying mortgages or buying a house or any of this kind of stuff, So really we could just dispense with the fetus part. It's kind of irrelevant. No, it's not the real life. You're just getting ready for the real life. When I went to high school in Canada, we used to have, there was a profession in the high school, and they were called guidance counselors. And it was very strange, like you kind of, guidance for what? Like they'd be, well, actually they were giving us instruction in Anapanasati and Chenrezig meditation. They were giving us profound guidance. No, actually, most of the guidance counseling was, what do you want to be when you grow up? Have any of you ever had that question posed in your life? Have you ever posed it for yourself? Did you pose that at 5? Okay. I began by putting forth all kinds of things which I thought my parents would love me more for. So I said, oh, I want to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be But after a while, this wasn't really achieving what I wanted. Although, if you said I want to be a garbage collector, I discovered that they, the rallies would come around, and you could be smart ass and say I'm going to be a sanitary engineer, right? It doesn't spark it. You're already having conditioning that you got to have, not only be an individual, but you have to have to be an individual is to have power, is to have volition, is to have agency. Okay? This is an overlay of a larger agency. I mean, after all, you've got no power. You haven't got a clue how a sperm and an egg join together, right? And yet you are it. This is what you are. I'm trying to point out this is not a weird Buddhist thing. This is a conundrum of living. The person who doesn't actually learn and develop capacities for boundaries and selfness and able to move the universe and get food and get shelter and do the things that are needed, they don't survive. It's not an illusion. Maybe it's illusory-like, right? In the sense that it's constantly shifting and changing, and it's not separate from this deeper layerings of interbeingness, right? And, I just spoke about, kind of emergent corporeal relating. Underneath that, there are other layers, molecular relatings, right? Subatomic relatings, right? Cosmic relatings, right? But it's good enough just to expand our view enough, just to keep it within the cellular family. Today, I'm just introducing this theme. Okay? And I want to try and do something. I don't know how well it will work, but nevertheless, I want to try this. This could have been just a prolonged, ongoing conversation that I was having with Anne. And in a way, it might have been a lot better, right? Because it can be, we're not actually talking about here to learn generalities and philosophical positions. We're here to kind of see if we can just open the door a little, let in a little bit more light, right? That enables us to more fully embrace the kind of mystery of the living as it's presenting to ourselves now, with failing eyes or organs, right? With concern about our children and what's going to happen to the world, and right? I mean, these are just realities that people live with. Okay? And so today I would like to just have a pause now at this point and see if you can really hold the question, like, is there something that's challenging me in terms of aging and approaching death. I haven't even begun to mention the fact that death is a strange thing. And that part of the problem with death, again, is that is it an individual who's approaching death? Or when you die, do all the people who are, particularly the people who are very close to you, in a way, they a little bit die? The death is a community experience. It's not an individual experience. It's a community business. We're all in this, whether you are the dyer, right? Or you're a caregiver for someone who apparently is dying, right? We are all in this together. And the challenges are not just to age and to die, but to be with others who are aging and dying, like children. Right? Oh, the innocence of childhood dying away, and what's left of these awful adolescents. It is something, actually a flow that's been there. So let's just pause for a moment. And I want to invite from the people in the room, from people online, if there are kind of some particular angles and themes, illness, physical capacities, right? Things like this that we can perhaps shed some light on from a perspective of Dharma, right? That might actually transform the way we grapple with this very universal and challenging experience of walking into the unknown. In a way, I've posed this question in a very, very general fashion, but now I'm inviting you to kind of focus it down to the specific, the way this general question is currently juicily manifesting in your life. Would anyone like to offer any focuses? I'm going to jot some of these down with the idea that perhaps we can weave these in and through the remainder of today and also the next two gatherings.
I have something that has been a big experience in my life, which is I've had quite a few.
Can people hear Saul speaking on Zoom? Yeah? Good, great.
So my brother-in-law, who was like a brother to me, he committed suicide. He hung himself when he was 23, I was 25. And since then, I've probably lost up to 6 or 8 who I've known. And so this notion of suicidal ideation as a response to living. That's just a topic that interests me. And that our whole society appears to be in denial of. Fascinates me, but everyone, and the media, government, it's not okay to be to be put out there because it will encourage people to suicide, etc. So.
I think for me the area of anxiety probably is around the knowledge that everything will be different when, like, someone else dies. Like, my whole mandala of being will be different. So it's no different than life, really, because the next moment is unknown also. But death is much more in one's face, I think. It's much more major change.
So are you saying about after, like anxiety about what could be after someone
After
else
the dying,
dies?
after somebody else dies,
Yeah.
I think that's probably it's not a concern, that's too strong a word. It's just an acknowledgement that it's going to be really different and how am I going to be in the midst of that really difference? The actual process of dying, whether it's myself or someone else, seems to be, I don't know, I seem to have more confidence that, or it'll just unfold. And whereas the other bit, a step further on, is a bit more of an anxiety there.
I mean, I think almost anything we're going to talk about here is going to be some kind of expression of fear, anxiety, concern. You know, like I'm not trying to nail it all as fear or anxiety or concern, but on a scale, maybe concern is very mild, fear, anxiety, or something, and about something which we might know very well we don't have any control over. Okay? And like this, how in a sense do we move towards a place of equanimity? Okay? In the face of these challenging things, without that equanimity being disengagement. Like an equanimity which is not different from just a flooding of love. Because often we think of equanimity as almost like a kind of a passive. Tell the story of this person who came in to see me years and years, decades ago in Christchurch, and we had a long talk and then she was just walking out and she got to the door and she turned around and glared at me and said, "You know what bugs me about you Buddhists?" I was totally shocked. It was like a completely different space than all our conversation had been. And I just kind of waited for the punchline. And she said, "You're so damn calm." And so then I used to have to kind of make a point to try and be overly expressive of concern, when actually I was feeling quite equanimous about the whole thing. I mean, it's just a life happening, Oh, you're dying. Oh, big deal. Right? You're terrified. Oh, let's try and deal with that. Not the dying. We can't do anything about the dying. We can do something about being terrified over what is. Right? And so all of this, the doings that we could have, are part of the maturing of the human being, you might say. Like over the course of an entire life, we meet with having to let go. A sudden change in a job, or the children leave the nest syndrome. You're no longer really a parent on call. you got nothing to look forward to unless they have children, and then you can be a kind of quasi-grandparent, as if there's nothing else in life. It's understanding. How do we kind of grapple with this? Okay. So other like specific entry points. Just I'm going to go through the people in the room, and then I'll look for the people on the screen. Yeah.
It's the same thing, but in particular for me, coming from a very busy life, where there's kind of there was a, there's a kind of a sort of kind of an obligation to be energetically involved and busy. And then, sort of moving into a place where there is less energy and less desire to be energetically involved in some ways. And, the anxiety that goes with that, or the worry about it, is, does that mean falling asleep? Does that mean withdrawing and being not engaged? So it's that sort of balance. I mean, I think it's already resolved. In the doing, it's already resolving. But it's the kind of, at the beginning, it was like an anxious anxiety about losing the busyness, meaning sort of, losing engagement.
Yeah.
But actually what seems to happen is the engagement just deepens in a different direction.
I mean, this is a huge one, isn't it? I mean, whether you call it, the crises of retirement,
Yeah.
We talk about having a midlife crisis, right? But there's also the kind of retirement crises. What do you do now?
Well, that's very real. I mean, I've been working, for example, in my case, for 40 years, full time.
Absolutely.
So it's a very real thing. But yeah, so it's interesting. It's a really interesting process.
And it's a challenge, but there's also an opportunity. That's why I talk about the challenges and the opportunities. It's not so much we got our challenges, but we got our opportunities. The challenges are the opportunity. The opportunity is the challenge. It's like through the living of that, through accepting the challenge, through having a culture that can accept the challenge, so that you're not kind of, others aren't going, oh, try harder, oh, go and register for a night course, oh, go and do this, are you bored, like trying to, in a sense, send you back to more of what you were doing before, encouragement. To have a culture that can actually, accept this. I mean, imagine for a moment the expectations we have. The expectations we have for a child are that we don't expect the child to go out and get a job and buy the food. Hopefully. Right? A young child. Right? We don't expect, but it's kind of natural and part of our culture to think, you look after a child. And adults kind of happily, if they're healthy beings, happily participate and help. Right? And then it's quite natural in our society to feel that as an adult, you're not a recipient, you're not a dole bludger, you're a contributor, right? And you do this. And yet we come to this other end. At the beginning, we were this interbeing, interknowing. In the middle, we're just playing with this wonderful thing of individuation and separateness and all the possibilities and powers and capacities that are there. And in the end, that starts to fade away, and we're just left back with interbeing, interknowing again. And actually, we need to be looked after to a degree. Right? But we don't know how to be looked after anymore. Like, if I'm going to be looked after, that means I'm kind of an infant. It's like kind of infantilism. I can't look after myself. You know, it's not just a matter of like caring, for, but also to be cared for. To be able to somehow have a society which can acknowledge. It doesn't mean that old people can't contribute anything, but their energies are different. And if you're living in a society, you're beginning to kind of make peace with the you know, learning to kind of just let go and learn. But meanwhile, all the messages are coming from the surrounding world that you're giving up, or you're not. Come on, you can do things. So like, register now's an opportunity. Now you can go and do all those Dharma retreats that you wanted to do. Right? Sign up and do all these retreats at the Dharma Center and at Wangapeka and so on. And yeah, great. I wonder, is this, you know, what would it be like if we really had a feeling? I think behind this is a culture of wisdom and compassion, right? And non-clinging responsiveness, right? To be able to move with this. But these are huge challenges now, aided and abetted by the seeming secret nature of our lives. You know, well, this is your private life, get this together, but your public life, you don't talk about your private life. Right? This kind of, we're drawn with old age, we're invited into arahatship. Yeah. Just Amy, you were. Yeah.
I'm interested in that experience of on the deathbed and reflecting on your life and using that as a perspective bringer to my life now. Like thinking, you know, will this matter? Will I regret that in my final moments? And
oh, you're meaning as a meditation you're doing now?
Yeah.
You kind of imagine yourself
kind of
on
use
the
death
deathbed.
as a teacher.
Yes.
And a
look
perspective
back.
bringer.
Yeah. That's an absolute classic spiritual practice in many different spiritual traditions, not just Buddhism.
Yeah.
Right. And the meditation is sometimes the word that often gets translated for death is marana. And I can't help but having a life of punning behind me. Even with my fading neurons, I've still got pun neurons left, right? And Mara is sometimes means illusion. Mara, right? And Na is negation. No more illusion. Marana, right? It's quite different than what we're talking about dying. People die with massive illusions. They didn't really marana though, right? The interesting thing is that marana in Buddhism is frequently absolutely glued to another word, jati. And so they talk about jati marana, right? And jati means birth. And it's a recognition, a deep recognition that, just as I read from that poem, it's like each birthing of this is a dying of that. Each dying of that is a birthing of this. You know, the dying of your busyness is the birthing of what, right? And we don't know what is being born, right? And so that's the real meditation on death is that. But sometimes the kind of a less deep meditation on death is simply a kind of almost like scare myself to death to live a decent life now, right? I'm going to drop dead, and so is this important? What am I doing? You know, and use that as a kind of a foil, right? But as our interest expands, we realize this is a birthing, death thing that's taking place now. You know, that was a transformation of how we see death. It could be that we could come to a state where, you know, death's not a problem at all. Right? I remember my father and I, towards the end of his life, we would have when we occasionally met, which was only about once every 2 years or so, when I happened to be in Canada at the time and would go and visit, and we'd have conversations. And the last year or so of his life, he was very ill, and he ended up in intensive care in hospital. And we would frequently talk about death and dying and so on. And one day he said to me, and it just felt extraordinarily profound. He said, I've realized that I don't have any fear about dying. He said, I just suddenly realized that I'm afraid that I might not die. And what will I do then? How do I live? It's kind of like twisting it around. This is preceded by, he retired, he was retired from work by his heart. Right? He had a massive heart attack and had to quit his job. And so then he was always living on the edge that, any moment he's going to drop dead with a heart attack. But he didn't. Another year went by. And then next thing you know, he's in a relationship with another woman, right? And then she's gone, and another one comes along, and he's still there, and his heart's still beating, and it speeds up at certain times in the relationship. And, it's like that, he's and slowly, the sense that he wasn't going to, imminent death sort of gradually faded away. And he realized that it was very convenient to sort of live as if he was going to drop dead any second. Right? But then suddenly it dawned on him, what if I don't drop dead in a second? Instead of just being, I'm just busy dropping dead and having fun on the way. What am I doing? Am I living? Right? And so, it can be a very fruitful meditation. But it's steps on the way of deepening. Right? Because you're not really dead or, on your deathbed looking back at now. You're totally alive now, imagining what it's like to be dead. So this takes a huge amount of vitality and youthfulness to have this visualization of being dead. Eventually you get so old that you don't have the energy to do that visualization anymore, so you just go, I don't have a clue. Huh? Imagine for a moment if you cease to kind of identify as being simply this individual with a name and a shape, body shape. I used to be slim and kind of healthy and muscly and so on, and then I kind of became fat and unmuscly, and God, it was kind of like shameful. And then I had to start trying to think of excuses. Oh, it's due to the treatment, right? Oh, you're going to take these medications and so on, and it's kind of like leads to the shape I've got now. Oh, that's okay. Or, oh, it's a genetic characteristic. Then it's okay because you blamed it on something else. But imagine for a moment just kind of actually being in a flow of interest and wonderment and engagement. Engaging when you've got the energies to engage. Just contemplating the mystery when you don't have the energies to engage. Okay? And, in a sense you begin to realize that death is a kind of a concept that arises in the mind of a living being. You become convinced that everything that you are is this living that you are. You don't live and then you have experiences, as if the experience dies and the living goes on. And then maybe, death happens for other people, but it doesn't happen to you. Your business is not dying, your business is living. And you had something.
It's to do when you asked us to contemplate something.
Can you hear Anne? She's at the back of the room. Could you speak up?
Yeah.
So
So the question to contemplate something for ourselves. So I don't like physical pain. I don't like being sick. I get depressed. I
I don't like having physical limitations, because then I can't retain my independence. And you touched on, you know, we need to get support and help. Well, how am I going to get support and help? Will I pay for it? What can I trade for it? Like I haven't entered into, I have actually a couple of marriages, you know, till death do us part, but I haven't been particularly good at that contract, and I'm on my own. And well, I'm not on my own actually. I'm surrounded by people. I live in a small village, but that is really central to me. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, how can I create a financial situation where I can afford to get the help I might need, etc. In the way that I might want it. Yeah, thanks.
You were sort of waving in. Did you?
I was just building on what Mary said. Just after death, having experienced the diagnosis of my husband in 2011, his death in 2016, to now, and the journey's not easy, but I think I have comfort in knowing that when we were together, we lived and we loved, and that helps you to process perhaps after death, and also build a new life, because as you said, we're living and dying everything, and our relationship came to an end, but now 7 years later there's a warmth rather than a fear of how I'm going to survive. So it kind of just happens. And I think with good people around you, there's nothing they can do really other than just be.
They can hinder.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I've lost friends.
No. I mean, it's like there's on one hand, there's nothing anyone can do, but they can hinder. They to help, so to speak. You know what I mean? But so in other words, absence of hinder though can be great support. It's kind of allowing. You know, this. I want to talk about this maybe on next week, next time we meet or something, but because the topic of grieving and how central that is to a human life, and what an incredibly important skill that is, right? That's really a big one. Right?
I know. I was always annoyed that people said, "Oh, you're grieving well." I thought, "Well, how the heck do you know?"
Yeah.
And I have good friends that will always be friends, and others I just think I don't know if they ever were friends. It's about they hindered. Well, no, they didn't hinder me because I departed from their friendship and I found a new pathway. So I feel very proud that I have travelled the road, because it's actually allowing me to go on and help others now.
Yes.
And hopefully without hindering them. It's just being beside them rather than. You can't teach anything about grieving. It's just.
And
primary Anne, the initiator Anne.
Primary Anne.
Come back in.
yeah, so time's passing and you feel that things don't work as well as they used to, and so on. But I found it's very easy, or I found that I put the whole death thing somewhere else, and didn't really consider it.
Can I just ask for a moment, what do you mean by the death thing? Could you just elucidate a bit?
No longer living.
You put it somewhere else. The thinking about this you put somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thinking on it. So it's just sort of in a way avoidance, maybe.
It might be and it might not be.
Yeah. So
so then if I really think, well, I am going to die, it's inevitable. I've always known that, but if I really think about it, there is a fear that comes up.
But, you know, it brings to mind the phrase that David Abrams used to describe the death of two of his mentors in his life. He put it at the beginning of one of his books, I think, Becoming Animal. And he talked about them expanding into the wider life of the planet. And I thought that was really quite a beautiful phrase. And he did emphasize, he was referring to Arne Næss, who was the kind of founder of deep ecology, and Thomas Berry, the Catholic he called himself a geologian, a theologian, and both who were really deeply lifelong engagement in kind of almost like a spiritual approach to ecology and interbeingness and interconnectedness. And so it's easy, we expand into the wider life of the planet. You know, we get eaten up by other critters, and our, you know, elements go back into the water cycle and the element cycle, and, you know, I mean, ideally, you know, I've got this great ideal. People sometimes say, well, what do you want done with your body after you're dead? I said, well, what I'd really like is just to lie me down under the local, in the veggie garden, and just leave me there, and let beings come and eat me, and kind of, but it's illegal. So it is really weird. It's like, it's not illegal for mice to do that. Right? We put these limitations. Mice have all this freedom, you know, but, right? No, we humans don't have any freedom here, right? Kind of not allowed to do that. But to me, it seemed to me that the process of Dharma was actually a process of not expanding into the wider life of the planet, but surrendering into the wider living that's always been, that was the beginning, that was there at the beginning, like surrender, before we're dead, right? Instead of just waiting for a one-off, right? We're kind of learning about, like, is my support system, I mean, this is not to sort of brush off Anne Sharplin's kind of question about support system in humans and community. But actually, long before there was any community that you knew about, you were already massively supported by DNA processes that have been going on for billions of years. The dedication, the continuity, the stability of this was amazing. Trees are busy cranking up oxygen for you, breath by breath, for you to be miserable and feel unsupported. Right? Like, you're drinking water from the rivers, from the oceans, you know, it's like but in a sense, the overlay of individualness, which then gets more and more individual, it's like individual human, you know, and then we get this kind of people writing PhD papers now on the value of allowing dogs and cats, pets, to be in old age homes. And they think, wow, this new discovery that somehow, you know, to have a cat purring on your lap and it causes relaxation, which maybe leads to kind of serotonin and good things and good chemistry, and as if somehow, where have you been? Right? Our society is so messed up that we're sort of discovering these things which are just so obvious. Right? But then we've got problems because, you know, like, we live out here. I spend a considerable amount of time in non-human environments, right? I go for a walk up in the Kaimai on an average of 6 days a week, I'd say, for an hour and 45 minutes every day. And I just walk by myself, and I don't take an iPod or a notepad or anything like that. I'm not listening to lectures or having a chance to practice my sadhanas, right? I am just surrendering into the mystery of this happening, right? And I'm kind of, in a sense, I feel my companionship is, I appreciate Mary. I appreciate you. Right? Like, people, contact, good. But it's not the whole of the support system. Right? And I can surrender into being supported, even when the people disappear. Right? So surrendering into the wider life of the planet, and we might find a point where we've surrendered, but my father maybe surrendered and discovered he was still alive. I think I'm mixing up the metaphors here, right? Didn't quite appeal to him, but this somehow this sense of why don't we sort of get this business of dying and all the fear and anxiety and problems with it, get it out of the way so that we can get on with living. So that we're not so afraid when we meet with somebody else who's dying. Because if we're really afraid, we might not actually be able to be there with them. Because it's more like, oh, I'm so full of my anxiety about you disappearing that I'm not actually there for you. And you know, they say in the Tibetan tradition, they say, if you want to know how you're going to die, look at how you lived. If you want to know how you're going to die, look at how you lived. Imagine for a moment that you lived in this way. No hope, no fear, freedom. Right? It's an ideal. I mean, you can't just decide, oh, I think I'll do that. Just turn the switch here. This is in a sense what a life of Dharma is about, is maturing this capacity. Right? And it's almost like revisioning a sense of where death sits in our, you know, if we're afraid of it, and we don't want to think about it, we want to push it away. Slowly, it starts to come in, whether we like it or not. You know, it's kind of events, other people go and die on us, you know, as if it's their fault, they did this to me, you know. Or, you know, I mean, there's new forms of grieving that are taking place today amongst millions and millions of people, and it's kind of incomprehensible how we deal with it. They're grieving for the death of species, of death of ecosystems, right? Maybe we're grieving for death of sanity. I mean, these are you know, and so am I just going to go out in a, you know, die of old age with a kind of misery that the whole thing was just really misspent, we really screwed up, and maybe it's better for none of us humans to be here anyway. Okay. And so this is what I'm practicing. I'm practicing fear. I'm practicing suspicion. I'm practicing, right? In a sense, that's what I'm doing. And so that's how I die. Okay? So part of this is by this inquiry and so on, and the kind of becoming more used to looking at things we didn't look at so much. There's no answers to this. This is the act of inquiring into and holding this space and being with this space and acknowledging that other beings are kind of heroically, we live heroically in this world of birthing, dying. Yeah?
So, intellectually, or you know, listening and reading, all those things can be understood or felt, but somewhere really deeply, and I'm sort of wondering if it's that survival thing that's very strong, where people will hang on to to survive, and it's making. I'm sort of beginning to wonder if it's making peace with that very deep programming to survive, and coming to being able to go. I think
Well, I think that you're putting it all together, but I think there's something more that can go in there, and that is that maybe it's not letting go of this kind of drive to survive and persist. but maybe it's letting go when we realize it's impossible to survive and persist. It's when we're still hanging on, when it's completely clear that we can't. It's a very strange kind of thing, you know. I mean, after all, you know, you lean on the red hot stove, and it burns you, and you go, oh well, it's all just interbeingness. This is burnt flesh. That's living flesh. It doesn't really matter, and maybe I should move, but I'm sort of practicing letting go of that kind of thing to leap away from the stove, right? I mean, I'm putting it. It's really obvious that there's tremendous life-preserving qualities in this individuation and sense of separateness, but along with it also go. It's workable up to a certain point, and then at another point it's no longer workable, but we don't know anything else to do. We've lost touch with this. Right? It's like, how do I discover in faith and trust and wonderment we give ourselves to this suchness? Right? It's not a technique. You can't say, oh, well, what you should do is have faith and trust and wonderment and give yourself to the suchness, and that's the end of the problem. Right? This is the life journey nature, but it's also why it's so potent to meet with beings who we have a sense are somehow able to do this maybe a little bit better than we are. Because it kind of models the possibility that we share, we're humans, we share this. That being somehow seems to be, maybe it's not kind of ingrained and impossible. Right? This is really important, right? And it's a gift that we can offer to each other. But these are huge questions, and I'd like to just kind of pause here with the room, and just give a chance for the people on the Zoom to perhaps offer thoughts or comments. Yes, Samaya. When I call you out, could you unmute yourself and then speak, and then mute yourself when you're finished?
Okay. One of my big anxieties at the moment around aging is I've been dealing with a chronic illness for just over a decade that's getting more and more complicated. And recently I've been experiencing short periods of time when I'm more and more dependent on others to take care of me. And so I'm wondering, you know, if there's going to be the care of my basic needs, am I going to find those who will care for me in a loving and respectful, considerate way? You know, how is that going to happen? And so, yeah.
You know, just I'm again, I don't want to kind of dismiss this with a short soundbite kind of thing, but it's like I think this is something which is very much a concern for many beings. But in a way, you know, we do the best we can. We set everything going, you know, if we can do something, I do it. In my speaking personally, I do what I can do to try and set things in place, right? And then I stop. That's it. And then you accept what comes out of that. And maybe then you look, is there another doing? Well, there's no doing. I can just sort of relax, and you know, it doesn't take any skill to die. You know what I mean? You don't have to study at university to find out how to die. Everyone does it perfectly. Right? You don't have to worry about that. You're totally equipped. It's like there's nothing to do. You just stop breathing. You just, right? We kind of make a joke, but in the meanwhile, these other concerns are there, you know, like, what can I do? So you do what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you begin to, and this is like, it's a very subtle thing. It's not a gross thing, right? If you find yourself being concerned, is it worthwhile being concerned? You know, and you think, yeah, it is worthwhile being concerned if that concern can lead to skillful action. But if that concern is just go nowhere worry, like chronic anxiety worry, you know, you right, then you might go, well, actually, this isn't very helpful. Maybe loving kindness would be more helpful. You know, but that's just giving up. Well, yeah, but there was nothing to do. So it's not a matter of like not having agency and working. We do what we can do. We create the best situation we can, and then we learn the art of, okay, I've done that, and let go. Right? Don't worry, the clock will turn and someone's going to ring your doorbell, or then somebody's going to email, or the sun will rise, and so on. As long as you're like, that's what my father suddenly realized, it just kept on going. Right? But to do that, then in a sense, what you're practicing bringing into the world is not anxiety, but you're practicing bringing into the world kind of love, forgiveness, acceptance, and maybe different ways of describing what we're talking about here, pertinent to your situation. But it's a big one.
Yeah, some of the dilemma for me is that the worry doesn't seem to be just empty worry. I realize that things need to be done, but I don't have a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And so it's, am I going to have enough energy to carry through what needs to be done before I can't do that anymore?
Yeah. Anna Dorrington.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne, for raising this wonderful subject, and Tarchin for providing us with this opportunity to explore. One of the things that I'd really like to learn more about through participating in this is it seems when we're approaching aging and dying in our cultures, societies, that we're focused on negatives, the struggle, the losses, whether it's memory or physical, which is all real. You know, I'm really interested to see how we can explore and come to understand the other side, which is what are we actually gaining from this stage of life and what are the opportunities. And you touched on it just a few moments ago. What helps me when I'm struggling is the role models, is the people that I actually know who have died or are going through old age and are doing it with a positive mindset and are not riddled with fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
And those are the people that help, that really, really help me. And I, taking the Bodhisattva vow, I want to be a good role model too for others. And coming right down to when you're in a conversation with somebody, if you're with somebody in the street and, oh, how have you been? And they start to talk about things that are not going well for them regarding aging and etc. How do I respond to those in those conversations? You know, I mean, mostly I need to upgrade my abilities around this way of being in the world. And a lot of the fear, I think, is linked to this deep need to control everything. And so it's like our spiritual path is very much about learning to let go into the great mystery. And like a lot of people have said, it's all very well we know these things, you know, but I think aging and growing closer to death is actually the ultimate opportunity to put all our Buddhist learnings into practice.
Yeah, wonderful.
And you know, this is what I'm really, really interested to grow myself into being a better role model here. And you know, the only way I can do that is in community, and that's why with others. And that's why hearing what everybody is saying and the questions that people are raising is so helpful. And I'm really, really grateful that we're looking at this together. So I guess that's where my interest is heading. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's almost like in a kind of a nutshell. It seems to me, Anna, you're talking about the kind of art of eldership, and the you know, and I think in our culture we've gone a long way from this art. We've kind of forgotten it. It's as if getting old is a very individual thing. You know, you're retiring to your little room and you're retiring to your hospital bed or something, and somehow as if there's no more work for you, and yet there is a work of eldership, of aging gracefully. We might put it sound very poetic and so on, and it's not to kind of simplify it. And I feel that this is something which this conversation is one small part of a process of our culture moving towards acknowledging this and honoring it. And you know, in Southeast Asia, in Buddhist countries traditionally, it used to be that when you came to the last sort of third of your life or quarter of your life, that was seen as a time to devote yourself to deepening meditation and contemplative practice and Dharma practice and so on. It was naturally taken for granted. It was also, it wasn't really a time to run off and learn Anapanasati or study this new kind of teaching. It was a time for integrating the skills that we've been developing all through our life of that individuation and strength and so on, and then kind of learning the art of making it all work, right? Nudging when you can nudge, letting go when there's no nudging to be done, being helpful when there's the opportunity to help, being relaxed in not sort of helping anyone when no help is required. You know, these are things which are very simple, and yet they can change the whole kind of texture of our culture. Bill and Kath, you've got a little hand sticking up on your screen.
Hi, Tarchin. Am I audible?
Yes.
I'm interested in the challenge of losing clarity or lucidity. And I'm wondering, like, they seem to me to be coincident with autonomy, with individual autonomy, and this notion of control. And I've this sense that increased dependency or interdependency is a threat to the clarity. Because it's just my personally, I find losing the clarity and rationality quite, there's fear for me in terms of that. I've had experiences in my life of that happening. And the clarity in a context of workable interdependency. and how much that's related to communication with those who you're dependent upon. And the communication issue in that. I mean, like, if we're dependent and we're kind of in this more interdependency context, it just seems the clarity is so dependent on that communication capacity, and both listening and speaking. So, and this whole thing of Kalyana Mitta and friends and supportive context seems to be very important. And just noting how we can change like aging and what's going on. In my experience with my parents and others, there's a kind of the aged care system here in Australia is the culture is of infantilizing the aged.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, like Anna was just saying, we've got an opportunity to challenge that with the Dharma foundation that we have to do that skillfully. So yeah, they're just some thoughts. I put them in the chat actually, if you if that's helpful. But
I'll have a look at that afterwards.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder, in a way, you know, if just reflecting on what you've said, Bill, if part of the aging and especially when we're getting quite close to dying, I'm not talking about dying now of like a youthful suicide dying, because that's a kind of like more of some kind of decision point got made kind of thing. But
or elder suicide.
Or an elder suicide, but someone who's kind of just you're drifting towards the end, and there's a kind of there's a sense that, you know, I remember Wanchuk, who many of you from Canada knew, and she was 84 years old, and she said to me once, she said, "Oh, I'm surrounded by young people," and I said, "Wanchuk, how old are you?" Just pointing out that, you know, statistically, if you're going to be in the public and you're 84, there's a good chance that they're younger than you. You know what I mean? It's just like, there's just what happens. And so the thing is that one of the features, if you like, of getting old for many people is times when maybe to others it looks like they're just kind of blanked out and not interested in anything. They're just kind of, you could just sit there and stare into space seemingly, you're not doing anything. So you don't really have much of a conversational piece going with the younger generations who want to have, you know, and yet at the same time I'm wondering if there's not like in deep meditation, there's times, for example, when we enter into a place of deep stillness, and there can be clarity without there being, you know, we might describe there being the presence of clarity without delineating edges. There's just clarity, right? I mean, this is not a suggestion for everyone. It's not a simplistic recipe to solve problems, but you know, in the last few years, as some of you know, I've been exploring learning to play classical guitar, and this is just, it's almost like it felt like a lifesaver in a way, because I've had so much pleasure in having a very clear, lucid, conceptual mind, you know, that could jump around and make connections, and I like words and writing and poetry and all this kind of stuff, and sometimes, you know, I just felt like there was just kind of complete, I wasn't interested in reading, it was just all just conceptual blah. And yet I would pick up and begin to play or learn, you know, I'm practicing and so on, and I realized that this learning a new skill involved a completely different kind of range of activities in the human organism, which actually produced a lot of pleasure. And I would sit and I feel like it's not that I was returned to the intellectual clarity, but I was remembering a kind of beingness clarity, right? And so it's almost like expanding our sense of this, where our limitations are fine when we can dance around them when we're younger. But when we get older, our limitations may actually feel like they're problems. If I only have, for example, a social network of humans for support, and then the humans aren't there for whatever the reason, then I have no support. But if I could expand this and see, and it's not just it begins perhaps as an intellectual thing, but this is why, in a sense, we talk about a life of meditation, a life of practice. And the thing that encourages me in this is that meeting people who are non-Buddhists, they've never meditated in their life, and yet they seem to come to this, they find this on their own towards the end of their life, which tells me that this is inherent in human beings. It's not a Buddhist thing. It's not I know people who practice meditation like crazy and they don't get it. They don't actually release into faith and trust and wonderment. What is that mystery? How does it work? The transmission that's no transmission. Okay? But I do know that I can discourage it, and on the other hand, I can encourage circumstances in which it might grow. I don't know how to grow it, right? But I know if I look after the soil in the veggie garden and I put the seed in and so on, I have no idea how to combine rain and sunlight and turn it into green leafy vegetables. I really don't have a clue, right? All I can do is kind of, as best of my ability, provide the opportunity for such a thing to be there. And I'm wonderstruck at this life which has been going on long before I got here. And I find it, I have limitations in my conceptualizing. And one of the limitations I have is conceptualizing absolute nothingness after I die. I just don't see, somehow in my belief system, the planet will still be here. Life will go on. Am I concerned that we're in the sixth extinction? Will humans go on? Maybe not. I'm totally open to that. I can see that we might not make it. But bacteria, I think, will go on, or process will go on, or relational activity. As long as the universe is made of more than one thing, there'll be relationship, there'll be activity, there'll be growth, and I have faith in that, right? So, and it's kind of extraordinary, right? And I can't describe the kind of the feeling of the engagement and the pleasure of the feeling of the sound and the texture of the string and the movement of the muscle and coordinations of so on to play this, right? And yet it provides a soil in which this kind of acceptance of just, then I can just sit there and stare into space and be the symphony as it is. This is fine. Was there anybody else there? You haven't necessarily, some people have put hand flags on their pictures. Paula, you've got a real hand up there. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, yeah. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to just live fully before I die. It's like I've spent this life striving, but for me it's about, I want to be fully present before I pass over. That makes sense.
I think it makes sense to lots of people who are listening.
Mm.
Yeah. I've just noticed the time has kind of slid by and it's 12 o'clock, or nearly. And so I'd like to just pause in this, and we'll continue our discussion in 2 weeks. I'm just wondering if next week we could sort of divide this topic up into 2 things, even though they're utterly connected. But perhaps next week we'll kind of go more into some of these challenges, and then in the third session we'll go more into opportunities, just to kind of set a theme kind of thing. And you can think about these things between now and then, and how it kind of works for you. And in the meantime, can we just finish off by just resting? I am animate. I am an animal. I am born from life and living, and so, dear friends, are you. Everything we experience reverberates with these truths. I think that many of us will find that by listening to each other here this morning, right, what others are saying can resonate for us, right? And we can really sort of feel, there's something here, right? And so when we don't have a class, we don't necessarily have this opportunity to resonate these things. And so part of, when we're busy in the middle part of our life, we're often too busy for these kinds of things. But towards the end of our life, eventually you get to the point where whether you've got time or not, time finds itself. You might be there in an intensive care bed. There's nothing to do. You just watch the people come into the worst. Absolutely fascinating. The cleaner comes in. Oh, this is really interesting. Something going on, right? And right, it's just the ordinary things of life, and little acts of kindness. And suddenly, the whole world, in a sense, has shrunk down to this, and yet it's still completely full. And in a kind of phase of retirement, you could fill your calendar up because you're used to having a full calendar. Or maybe you're not quite sure you want to just fill your calendar up. Bowls at 4 o'clock and bridge at 7 and having lunch with so-and-so at 12 and so on. Right? But maybe put another thing in your schedule if you want. And that is just a period of time to kind of remember. Many of you have been involved with Dharma teaching for years and years and years. There's no new teaching that I can give or that anyone can give you which is going to solve the problems. Right? However, it does help to be reminded. Okay? And so I would like to just offer you a possibility of a reminder. Which you can download off Green Dharma Treasury. Okay? And because it's been a work in process for a long time, it's gone through renditions of names. And so now if you look under practices, there's and then you go down under practices, and there's an area of like pujas and poems and reflections and so on. And there's something called reflections and prayers. That's all it's called. And then there's a subtitle, Nurturing a Life of Natural Awakening. And that poem about our relational beingness is in there, and there's many of them. Many of them will be extraordinarily familiar to you, but I find I even compile the thing myself, and I get inspired. The kind of simple. It's not a matter of going through the whole thing like some mechanical puja thing, but it's just you find yourself, one phrase, a turn of phrase, and suddenly you've got a kind of angle to take into your living, and it's a kind of a formless practice. It's not a practice of sitting in a certain posture on a cushion for so many hours or anything like that, right? It's a kind of ongoing, kind of sensitive engagement with living, with a kind of a deeper, juicy question moving you. And I think that some of you would find this quite useful, right? Especially in the latter stages of life. And one of the sharings of the merit, right, that I've written in here goes like this. Being the fullness of the human animal that I am, uniquely clothed in this continuous morphing collage of sentience, abiding in the monastery of a world that is utterly and profoundly alive. I wander in unpretentious openness, wonderment, and service. It's very simple. Repeating it to yourself a million times intellectually is not necessarily going to do anything. Right? But sometimes we can be in a place where we can take these simple ideas and just I wander into old age. I wander into dysfunction. I wander into brain mush, potato brain. I wander into clarity. I wander into, this conversation, this engagement, you don't really know where you're going. We wander on in unpretentious, right? In a deep sense, anything I say about what I am or where I'm going is so partial as to not really be applicable. I don't know. I've taken an entire life of learning to get to this place of not knowing. Right? Unpretentious about what I know. Okay? I wander on in unpretentious openness. Okay, here we go again. Okay, here we go again. Oh, I blew it. Here we go again. Right? It's gentle, it's steady, it's continuous. Unpretentious openness, wonderment. What on earth is going on? How is this universe dancing such that this arises for all of us? How does the universe, why do exploding supernovas give rise to love? I mean, through a rather long chain of events of creatures and biospheres and creatures coming into being, humans go, oh, love. What on earth is that? How? Wonderment. Death. Right? What an extraordinary thing when death knocks at my door, said Mary Oliver. Right? I want to greet this being, embrace this being. Unpretentious openness, wonderment, and when the opportunity is there, service. Of course, we give to our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and to the community and to our partners and to the pets and to the creatures in the garden and so on. When there's the opportunity to serve, we just do it because it's what we are. But when there's no doing, there's no call for it, we don't sit around and go, I better put up a sign and say, helper looking for someone to be helped. Because my life is empty if I don't have this continuous sense of being the helper who depends on having helped people to make them feel worthwhile. It's just, this is something quite extraordinary and rare in our culture, this ordinariness. By the power of these wholesome activities, may our lives be rich with awakening. Living thus, may we abandon all unwholesomeness. In the very midst of this mystery of gestation, conception, gestation, birth, growing older, exploring, developing strengths and skills, aging, occasional sickness, and eventual dying. In the very midst of doing this, of being this, may we help all beings to realize their true interbeing, interknowing nature. Sarva-Mangalam. Thank you all in wherever you are in the world. And it's when I look more carefully at the screen and recognize some of you, and I kind of feel a smile of delight. It's lovely. Good.